Markets in Law, written by Jeff Ricketson, read by Stephen Leger. One of the greatest benefits markets offer is variety. By providing many and varied substitute goods and services, they ensure that nearly everyone meets their needs in a way that balances quality and price efficiently. One of the greatest problems with monopolies is their ability to force customers into one-size-fits-all economic arrangements. Without variety, those that cannot afford the monopoly price must go without the good or service. Among those that can afford the monopoly price, those who want the service must pay more than is efficient to receive an amount other than what they really need. Even worse than simple monopoly is enforced consumption of monopoly goods. When consumers must purchase a good that is provided at monopoly price, even those who would not otherwise participate in the industry, such as those who do not benefit from the service even when provided, suffer from the economic inefficiency. This is the case with many government-provided goods and services, like education and roads. However, there is no greater instance in which this problem is apparent than in law. As Gustave de Molinari argued in his paper, The Production of Security, economic laws of production impact law and law enforcement every bit as much as any other industry. Under a law monopoly, all the same criticisms of other monopolies apply. The price will be as high as possible without rebellion, and the services as cheap as possible. The only difference is what counts as profit under a government. Because bureaucrats have little access to the fiscal profits the government is capable of producing, they do not concern themselves primarily with the monetary gains or losses of their enterprise. Instead, their goals are power, control, prestige, privilege, respect, etc. Politicians provide whatever service and charge in the form of taxes, fines, regulatory pressure, etc. Whatever amount gets them these things. Instead, if a market were allowed to provide security, the firms protecting individuals' rights would have every reason to provide the protection their clientele could and would pay for. Unlike government, a firm in a market cannot force people to purchase their product, anyone else's product, or any of the product at all. Their prices and services would be based on supply, on demand. What is possible to provide at a given price, and how much is wanted at that price? There would be a strong check against power grabbing and mass corruption because either of these would result in the mass cancellation of their customers' policies and failure of the firm. Some might criticize law markets by saying that under a polycentric law model, the law between any pair of individuals would be different from between others. This would lead to situations where no written code of law could evolve. I contend that this is, in fact, a desirable quality. It is certainly true that the law should not be the same for two people who are very different. Differences in culture can easily give rise to differences in what amounts to fraud. A contract stipulating that one party will provide a lift constitutes asking two very different things depending on where in the English-speaking world the contract takes place. The impossibility of a strictly codified legal regime would force courts to fall back on ethical principles rather than adhere to the arbitrary will of a tyrannical government. Another criticism of private law is that it would be very difficult to protect large estates. Again, this is actually a benefit to the system. When the poor pay more or less the same amount for police protection as the rich do, it is easy for the rich to have all their property protected at the expense of the poor. If the rich had to bear the full cost of their protection, they could no longer use the police as a means to exploit the poor. This, aside from being just, is desirable as a natural check on how much the rich could influence the legal industry. It is also why the rich could never buy an army to reestablish their government. The cost of weapons, armor, hazard pay, healthcare, and maintenance would be prohibitive. The hired firm could never make more money by serving one rich entity than it could by serving as many smaller entities as possible. Clearly, market forces apply to all people, as they are simply the force that determines our choice. Given that law must be made by people making choices, we can say that law is no different of an economic enterprise than any other product. For anyone who believes markets in scarce goods are desirable, a market in law is desirable. And we do not hesitate to add that after this reform has been achieved and all artificial obstacles to the free action of the natural laws that govern the economic world have disappeared, the situation of the various members of society will become the best possible. Gustave de Molinari.